I oh, I'm on now. Okay. I thought I would go ahead and start doing this so we could sound check it. Um, but I took it out and put it where it normally goes because I was like, this is where my backpack goes, and then I forgot I did that completely until I got here and opened the trunk to get my backpack, which had my computer out, so I could print out my notes. So I'm gonna be squinting at my phone a lot because I emailed it to myself. I was ready, um, but yeah, my printer at my house is out of ink, so I'm having to use this one instead of going to get ink. But don't don't tell Emily that I'm using all the ink, unless we're live now and I just told on myself. Okay, great. Don't Emily, don't worry about it. That wasn't real. That was not true. Thank you. Let me get my notes app open here. This is this is good and bad. Um, Sorry, Erica made a note in my notes app because it said nail brush, Mountain Dew, lemonade, popcorn, bag of ice. So I was like, "Why? I don't need a nail brush." I thought it was me for a second. I don't use the notes app that often. Anyway, um, I guess we'll go ahead and start. We start with prayer requests normally. Yes. Any prayer requests or praises? Dave Bolin. You said he's back. He's home now. Okay, good. Good. Continues getting better. Mark Board is having back surgery in like a week and a half, right? Or a week, something like that. Because I think I talked to Mary today, and I think he's going down to Alabama for like a week, and then he's coming back up here and having back surgery. So he'll be up here for like a couple months after that. But that's hard to do, to try to get into the swing of things and then come and have to have surgery and be gone and recouping for a while. So, uh, well, plus the move in general, we'll just man. The Lunsfords are just getting over COVID as well. Um, they said they could have been here today, but they felt, they said it was right on the edge. Like, so I was like, that's not you just stay home. You're good. That's why I got the Nicholas. It was like same. I was like, all right, man, you can't. Like, you gotta give more words than that. Anything else? No. All right, that was easy. I didn't even need to open my notes app for that one. Um, but I guess we'll start with a word of prayer. Dear God, thank you for this day. Thank you that we could be here to just dive into the Word a little bit more, to ask questions and communicate on a little bit more of a personal level, to just learn more and just grow together as a family. God, right now we bring a couple of the men and some families of our church to you, God. Dave Bowling, we know that he's been struggling lately, and God, we're just so blessed that he's home now, and we thank you for the wisdom and the strength that you gave his doctors and him to get better and to go home. God, we just pray for a continued watching over him, continued keeping him healthy and safe, God, so he can come back to us and worship with us in person again, God. We pray for the boards for Mark and Mary. It's always scary and difficult to move, no matter what, and we know they've been such a integral part of our church family here, and so we know that we're going to miss them, but we know they're going to do amazing things for you wherever they go. God, we know Mark has a surgery coming up soon, and we just pray for, again, like with Dave, his doctor's strength and courage and his alertness, God, while he's performing the surgery. Just put your healing hand on that whole process, God, and help him to recover and recoup faster. God, we love you and thank you for all your blessings, and continue to be with us and help us to seek you constantly. And in Jesus' name, amen. All right. Let's get back over here. Help if everything was together. Okay, so I thought I would start this by asking, since it was Mission Trip Sunday, asking if you guys had any questions about the mission trip, like how how it went, or because sometimes we get up here and we say, yeah, mission trip, but we don't really get into any details, like besides some of the surface level stuff. So I didn't know if you guys had any questions about how that worked, or um, the just whatever, anything extra we wanted to, if you want to know anything about, and if not, then we can move on. Yes. Hmm. We take people that are going into the ninth grade, so like they're eighth graders that have just like finished middle school, and so in August they'll be starting ninth grade. They'll be starting high school. So, yeah, right. And then most of the times, well, in years past, Jonathan, we've kind of combined with like the college group, and we've taken high school and college and some young adults and stuff. And we still did that in a way this year, but we mostly had kids. Like there was myself, Erica, uh, Kathy, Tanya, Melody, Nick. Okay, I said mostly kids, and I'm counting off a bunch of people. But then the rest were college. Oh, Sarah, and the rest were college kids, and there was 20 of us. So that we had 13 kids go, and it was. I mean, again, like we had the biggest group that we've ever sent. So it was. It was a good group. Some of the in the past, especially with South Dakota, South Dakota is dangerous, and some of the kids were dealing with our middle school age already, and so it'd be hard to bring a middle schooler like a sixth grader and say, "Hey, I need you to help minister to, another, and so it'd be putting a lot. Plus, in South Dakota, we were walking door to door in those small places, and Jonathan was almost robbed when he went up there one time. They were one day they locked us down, said we couldn't leave the Dream Center because there was gun violence. One day we couldn't go to one of the towns because there was a murder the day before. So I mean, South Dakota was a heavy, scary place, and so we kind of made that like high school and up, just so it's a certain maturity level. Not saying that all high schoolers are mature. We all know that that's not true. But like a certain attempt at a maturity level. This one was a lot better organized. Whiteville, though, like if you look it up, crime statistic-wise, Erica looked it up. It was like 2.5 or 10 times the normal, like the national average for violent crimes. Like that you lived there, like 1 in 10 people were a victim of a violent crime that lived there or something. So, I mean, that area was a little rough as well. But we were in the church, like we were safe. But still, it's just people that are a little more aware and less prone to wander off, I guess. So. Well, that's true. That's true. Anything else? So we went through a mission organization called Praying Pelican Missions. This is the first year we use them. They have missions all over. They have a bunch of international missions. They deal in the Appalachians. What did I do? Appalachians. So they deal there. They deal in the Gulf, like in Texas, Louisiana. They deal in Florida, North Carolina. I signed us up for the Carolinas, and it really said we were probably going to be in South Carolina. But then when it got closer, they just kind of put teams where they need them, and so they needed a team in North Carolina at that time. Because I signed up for like a block, like a date, and I said we want our mission trip to be June 8th through the 14th, and then they in this area, and then they would put you where they needed you. While we were there, I think there was 2 other Praying Pelican groups that were in the area. I don't think they ever worked on a project with like the same project we were, but they were like in the area doing stuff because our trip leader left to go like help them with something because something happened to their group. I can't remember exactly what it was, but like I think one of their things they were planning on doing that week, one of their missions like fell through. Like that guy called and said, "Yeah, we don't need you anymore." Like while the group was there, and so they had to like find other stuff for him. But it was it's kind of pre-planned. They sent us an itinerary, talked to us, asked what our strengths were, like our group strengths, and we emailed and called back and forth. And I said, our group's used to working hard, and we've gone door to door, it's and shared with people, prayed with people. So I mean, we can really do whatever you need us to do. And then they assigned us to that area. They had two people with us, Camille and uh-oh, I forgot his name. He was the one I worked with too. He was with me in my group. I definitely should know his name. Austin? No, I blanked. Uh-oh. We're live too. This is great. But I worked with those two. One went with the group that did the food pantry, and the other one went to the construction site. And so at all times, one of the Praying Pelican people was with one of the groups. So we had, somebody that we could say, if we needed to, what do we do next and stuff like that. And that's a huge leap from what we had been doing. Like in South Dakota, I love South Dakota, don't get me wrong. Like that mission was life changing, and it was every year. But we would get there, and it was kind of like we never knew what we were going to do, like minute to minute. And so it was kind of hard to have a routine, and they like had an itinerary a month in advance or more, and so it was, we didn't stick 100% to it, but like we aimed to, and so it made it kind of easier. But we reached out to them and used them, and the leadership and I have talked about if we're going to use them again, and so it's those type of things. You typically do go through an organization if you're going kind of far away. If we were to do what I want to do with the junior high, like the junior hires, I want to just contact a church in like, Pikeville or somewhere and be like, hey, do you know of anybody that has a service project that we can do? We can dig a ditch, we can build a ramp, just something that maybe we could try to do for like a weekend trip or a day trip or something. But that's stuff that we would contact the church and kind of do ourselves. But this big week-long thing that we do with the high schoolers, we tend to go through an organization because it's just better organized. I get, so, but yeah, it's pretty good. Hmm. Oh, I know. It was well, and we praised them a bunch, and they did amazing on the trip. And it's like they flip in a different gear because every now and again here it's like, hey guys, we need to go do this. Let's sometimes as simple as, hey, put those chairs back in a row, and it's like, you know. But then you get them on the trip, and it's like, hey, we need to go literally empty out a barn and then put it all back in 90-degree heat with 80% humidity, and they're smiling and laughing and doing it fast. And so it was, they're crazy good kids. But
I went with them when they went to New Orleans after the hurricane hit down there, and that group was all hard workers. We worked on a house that's been washed out and remodeling and painting and all that stuff, and it was nice to see. Again, no complaints. They all buckled in and did the work, and so it was nice to see how they spread the word of God, in that way. Plus, they talked to people there, about it, and it was really nice. They worked on one house that the guy was blind and it wiped his house out, so they had to put the furniture and stuff back in this house exactly where it was before.
mm,
Yeah. So and they enjoyed that talking to him, and stuff. So I'm sorry, don't get off.
the something else that really impressed, and Erica touched on it, I think, a little bit, but uh, at night when, because we would have our devotionals after supper, and then we would let the kids loose, and we would go outside, and they like to stay in a circle and hit a volleyball around, or I think one night we went up and played Foursquare and stuff. But like we would just kind of bond a little bit. But then bedtime would come, and we would, everybody would crash because they were really tired. Well, the girls, I found out, uh, student led. Like all the adults were crashing and going to sleep, and the girls because they were kind of all in one little room, like in a square with their little air mattresses everywhere, and they were leading, like they were having another devotional with themselves, and then they sat and like prayed in a circle and like went around, and it like by themselves, like student led. It was awesome. The guys did not do that. They I don't know if I should say what they were doing on with the live stream happening. We'll just say that Ian and Mason, you know what you did, and it was very weird. They found a way to make their belly buttons make noise, is what we'll say, and they were very proud of it, and they tried to do it a lot. So it was so weird. But that's what the guys were doing while the girls were praying and connecting to God more. So, which just tracks, honestly, it tracks. Poor Nicholas was over there. I was kind of sequestered a little bit, and Nicholas was right in the middle of them, and I just kept hearing him go, "Guys, come on," and then you would hear, "Never mind." And it was like, okay, gosh. Anyway, sorry. Back on track. Any other questions? Okay. Well, we talked a little bit about Samuel, and so I thought it'd be interesting to talk a little bit more about him, get some facts in it, because it was kind of an interesting life that Samuel led, besides, the story that happened to him when he was 12. I have pulled this up. So the Bible tells us of a lot of significant adults, right? Like we have tons of stories about what people do when they're grown, but there's not a lot of stories about significant pregnancies or infants, right? So we have Samuel, because where his mother prayed and finally God blessed her and made her pregnant. And then there was Isaac, because that was the promise God made to Abraham. Ishmael, Jacob and Esau, Perez, which I had actually had to look that up because I was like, who Perez? I don't remember that one. He was a son of Judah and his daughter-in-law Tamar, who was also a twin. So I get they talked about that whole situation because that was just a weird situation. Samson, because same thing. Samson's mother was struggling to have a child, so she said, "I'll dedicate it to you," which is something that they have in common. Samuel and Samson is they were both Nazarites, and so they never cut their hair. We don't really hear about Samuel doing anything crazy with his hair like Samson did, but that's because Samson was a little crazy himself. I talk about that with the kids sometimes. I'm like, hey, you want to hear, like, I list off some of the crazy stuff that Samson did, and they're like, who the heck is that? And I was like, that was a Bible hero. And I was like, that was Samson. And they were like, he didn't do all that stuff. No, he really did. It was wild. The craziest thing is I don't know why we're branching off topic a little bit, but he caught, like, was it 200 foxes and, like, tied their tails together, put a torch and let them loose. Catching 200 foxes? Like, he killed a bunch of people with a jawbone, but foxes are fast and smart. And Samson was just out there saying, I'm going to catch these guys, 200 of them. Like, not just a couple. He's catching 200 and storing them somewhere. And then he's like, okay, I'm going to put a torch on your tail and let you loose into the... So weird. But that was Samson. So Samuel shared that trait with Samson. His name, Samuel, means name of God or God has heard, which I think is interesting, because where God was calling him, it was like, I call you, but I also hear you type of situation, which I think is pretty meaningful, because we talked about, God calling Samuel. Well, God also was listening to Samuel and was listening to his people. So I think that was really good. Samuel came from the tribe of Levi, which is what qualified him to be a priest in the first place. Like why he was kind of brought into the inner fold of Eli's home was because he was already in the priest tribe. Priest tribe, yeah. Samuel was technically a judge. I found that very interesting as well, because like Samuel has a lot of stuff on his name, like you tack on there, and he was the 14th judge, because Eli would have been the 13th judge, because it was just the leaders of Israel. You got 12 of them in the book of Judges, and then Eli was the chief priest, so it would have been the head of Israel as the 13th judge, and then Samuel took over and became the 14th. before he broke that and started making kings with Saul and David. So Saul, speaking of the kings, was tall and handsome, right, from the tribe of Benjamin, very charismatic. So Samuel met him and was like, "Oh yeah, this is the king. This feels right." And God had warned the Israelites before. He was like, "You guys don't need a king. What we have going on is working fine. Like, yeah, you guys are making some dumb choices, but you don't need to be like the other nations. You don't need a king." And they're like, "We want a king." And so God said, "Okay, Samuel, give him a king." So they got Saul, who was a little crazy and did some not very smart things. And so then, in the middle of Saul messing stuff up, God tells Samuel, "Okay, take two, pick somebody else." And so Samuel goes to this guy's house and he sees all these sons arrayed, like brought out for him. And he was like, "Oh, yeah, the tall guy." Yeah, he did it again. He was like, "I see the tall guy. That's going to be a great king." And God goes, "No, Samuel, stop it." They were like, "The one I'm talking about isn't even in there." So then they had to go find David, who was out with the sheep. So Samuel is not just a prophet. If we're looking at the line of prophets, like where the book is set up, he's the first prophet, right? I think Moses is technically the first prophet and probably maybe the greatest prophet, but Samuel starts like the line of prophets, right? Peter actually refers to him as the first of the prophets. Acts 3:24 says, "Indeed, beginning with Samuel, all the prophets who have spoken have foretold these days." So he was, yeah, beginning with Samuel. So it was saying one of the first ones. So again, he's not one of the first ones, or one of the first people to be called a prophet, but Peter says beginning with Samuel and moving forward. Where am I? This is so small. This is, sorry, I'm so ill prepared. So Moses was earlier and greater when it comes to the line of prophets, right? However, Moses is earlier and greater in the line of prophets, but Samuel led an order of prophets. So that's what we think Peter was talking about. Is Samuel kind of started this like prophet organization almost. In 1 Samuel 9:20, this is talking about King Saul. He says, "So he sent his men to capture him, but they saw a group of prophets prophesying with Samuel standing there as their leader. The Spirit of God came on Saul's men, and they also prophesied." So this is Samuel with a group of prophets, and they're all prophesying. And Saul had sent men to, I think, capture them or do so. But God said, "Nope, you guys are going to prophesy as well." And so it's like kind of Samuel's just starting like this cool revolution, this cool new thing that they're going through. So, and like we mentioned on Sunday, Samuel's story is also pretty interesting because it starts at a time where the prophecy wasn't happening, right? We didn't hear the voice of God as often, is what it says. So Samuel kind of starts with him, and he kind of progresses and makes it more and more, bigger and bigger, which is interesting. So, and after Samuel, Israel's history comes alive with kind of like this prophetic revelation, which is why part of the Bible right after David and Solomon is called like the prophets, right? You have the histories, poetry, then the prophets, and then the Gospels, and then the letters is kind of how you can, divide the Bible up. And prophets kind of starts with Samuel. So this is the crazy part. This is what we might spend the rest of our time on. This is a story, and we have it here, and we can all read it together. So go ahead, actually, before I even preface this, we'll all kind of get on the same spot. 1 Samuel 28, 7 through 19. 1 Samuel 28, 7 through 19. So what happens here is a really weird story, and I've talked about it with the kids in some Sunday schools, right? So you have a ghost, and this isn't someone that God has raised to talk to that's died. This is like Saul says, "Hey, I'm gonna have a medium, maybe like this, a witch, some people could call him, bring Samuel back from the dead so I can talk to him." and we get this story, and it's pretty interesting. There's some stuff I've highlighted and underlined, and we can discuss it when we go through it. But in verse 7 it says, Saul then said to his attendants, "Find me a woman who is a medium, so I may go and inquire of her." "There is one in Endor," they said. So Saul disguised himself, putting on other clothes, and at night he and 2 men went to the woman. "Consult a spirit for me," he said, and bring up for me the one I name." Okay, so I've highlighted this. This is the first instance, by the way, where he says bring up. Okay, so Samuel has died. Samuel, who is one of the first prophets, right? Was a chief priest, was a leader, was a very godly man. And Saul says, "Bring up for me someone to talk to." Okay, so most of the time when we're talking about spirits and ghosts, we think, hell is down, heaven is up. So if someone's coming up, you know what I'm saying? So it's just interesting. But there's a lot more to this. It says, it continues, it says, "But the woman said to him, 'Surely you know what Saul has done. He has cut off the mediums and spiritists from the land. Why did you set a trap for my life to bring about my death?' Saul swore to her by the Lord, 'As surely as the Lord lives, you will not be punished for this.' Then the woman asked, 'Whom shall I bring up for you?' 'Bring up Samuel,' he said. When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out at the top of her voice and said to Saul, 'Why have you deceived me? You are Saul.' The king said to her, 'Do not be afraid. What do you see?' The woman said, 'I see a ghostly figure coming up from the earth.' 'What does he look like?' he asked. 'An old man wearing a robe is coming up,' she said. Then Saul knew it was Samuel, and he bowed down and prostrated himself with his face to the ground. Samuel said to Saul, 'Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?'" Talk about how weird this is for a second. Like this is something that's happening not by God's power, right? But by a medium's power. So if we read this, and granted some of this, if we really dive in and kind of look at the original Greek, some things might have been translated a little funky. But if we're looking at this just based off of this, ghosts could be real. Witchcraft could, there's stuff in here that's a little weird. And the Bible warns of witchcraft in other places too. So you would think, why would it warn so much of that if it was just fake and magicians, right? So there's other stuff that could be at play here, and that's kind of wild, right? When I told the kids that, they were like, "Wait a minute," and it was like, "What?" We're just reading straight from the Bible. And I was telling actually Dad and George Bogey we went and dropped off the truck earlier today, and we were mentioning this a little bit, and I said that talking about all the times that it said up, right? Like bring the spirit up. He's coming up from the earth. And we were talking about, I listen to this podcast every now and again called After Class, and it's a bunch of Christian professors, like theology professors, that get together and they talk about different topics. I first found them, Zach Lunsford showed them to me when we were talking about sex and God's definition of marriage and what that all means. And they had a really good series on that. And so I kind of used that when we were talking with the series with the kids about integrity and stuff like that. But they also had one on like heaven and hell. And their very first one, they're talking about how there's different Greek words and Hebrew words for each. Like you got to look at how many times there's like a purgatory that's mentioned. There's a hell. There's a Hades is mentioned several times, but the word hell is not mentioned very often in the Old Testament. So you got to look at other words around it, what they mean. They mentioned this story. They said, this person's coming up from the earth. Somebody that we consider a godly person. So where would they be coming from? There's a story. I believe it's with Moses, or I'm not sure, so I don't want to say it. But there's a story where they're talking about how someone was sent to Hades, right? And so it's like you're looking at these different words for different parts of like the afterlife. And I think it's interesting because up from the earth, was he asleep? And Samuel says, "Why did you disturb me?" too, right? So it's like, Was he sleeping? Was it, is it really Samuel too? Like we can continue here and we learn a little bit more, but um, we kind of get like this feeling of maybe this is just smoke and mirrors, right? It's like maybe this isn't actually Samuel, and if it is, what does that mean? So if we continue here, right, in verse, we'll start again in 15, where Samuel, I think that's 15, that's really small. Yep, where Samuel said to Saul, "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? I'm in great distress," Saul said. "The Philistines are fighting against me, and God has departed from me. He no longer answers me, either by prophets or by dreams. So I have called on you to tell me what to do." Samuel said, "Why do you consult me now that the Lord has departed from you and become your enemy? The Lord has done what he predicted through me. The Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hands and given it to one of your neighbors, to David. Because you did not obey the Lord or carry out his fierce wrath against the Amalekites, the Lord has done this to you today. The Lord will deliver both Israel and you into the hands of the Philistines." And this is the important part. "And tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. The Lord will also give the army of Israel into the hands of the Philistines." So this ghostly person is still kind of prophesying, right? Because he even talks about something that's going to happen in the future. He's because prophesying isn't just telling the future, right? That's not what it means. It just means you're a mouthpiece for God, right? It just means you're speaking with God's voice. So in here, Samuel's kind of saying, the Lord has done what he predicted through me. The Lord has done this, and the Lord has done this, and the Lord will do this, right? So he's not just predicting the future. He's not just making things up. And then he says, "Tomorrow you and your sons will be with me." So it means tomorrow you're going to die. And your army's going to be shattered, right? The Philistines are going to win, and you're going to die. It's heavy stuff, right? And if we look at what Saul has done, if he's not in the Lord's favor at this point, right? Because God's not even talking to him, and yet he's going to be with Samuel. So like, are they in the same place? Like like we're talking about bringing them up, and I don't know these answers. There's not like I don't know if there is a right answer to this question. It's just like food for thought, kind of, maybe something we talk to God about when we get to heaven. But were they in hell together, or were they like in this weird in between, this I don't want to say purgatory, because I don't think that's necessarily where we're at here, but is it just like maybe there's that theory of we're all just going to go to sleep, and then when God comes back we get raised up. So it's very, very interesting, right? Where Samuel is saying here, the ghost of Samuel, by the way, is saying here that you're going to be with me tomorrow. I think it's just very interesting. Something that you don't really see a lot in Bible stories of, wow, that's kind of different, And those are kind of some of my favorite questions and stuff I run across in the Bible, stuff that doesn't have an answer, because you're like, man, that's really cool to think about and theorize about, but I guess in the end, it doesn't really matter, because and that's why I tell people when they're like, well, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And it's like, well, I like to think about it, and I like to have some theories and some questions about stuff, but in the end, if it's not a salvation issue, like if it's not an issue about Jesus and the fact that he died and, I believe in him and that's how I get to heaven, if it's not a salvation issue, then it's just fun to think about. We don't got to fight about it. We don't got to say, my way's right, your way's wrong. We don't have to do any of that. It's just like, well, it's cool to look at this stuff and be like, oh, that's very interesting, because I don't know if anybody's going to be able to read that and be like, well, this is exactly what happened, because there's some wild stuff in here. But I loved that story when I found it, going through Sunday school with the kids, and then reading up on Samuel again. I remembered it, and I was like, oh, we got to talk about this. So, I mean, what do you guys think about that? We'll even open that up. Anybody? Just weird. All right, you ready for this super professional segue? Samuel led some really cool parties. That's another fun fact about Samuel. They talked about his Passovers for a while. It says hundreds of years after Samuel's death, a king named Josiah celebrates the Passover. It's such an affair. The author says it's the greatest Passover ever. Well, ever since Samuel's day. So in 2 Chronicles 35:18, it says there has not been a Passover like it in Israel since the days of Samuel the prophet, nor had any of the kings of Israel celebrated such a Passover as Josiah did with the priests, the Levites, and all of Judah and Israel who were present, and the inhabitants of Israel. So Samuel threw some pretty cool Passover parties, apparently. And the Israelites, well, now granted, after Samuel, things kind of went real downhill for a while with war and stuff. So they had to kind of focus on that and less on, celebrations. But you would figure with David and Solomon right after Samuel, somebody could throw a party. But Samuel's was apparently the best. Random tidbit of information for you. I found it and thought it was interesting. God calls Samuel by name, which you would look at and you would be like, that's not that important. But really, when you dive into it, he calls him by name twice, right? So it's like somebody that God has called by name more than on one occasion. And that's actually a pretty exclusive club. You've got Abraham, Jacob, Moses, Martha, Simon, and Saul are the only other people that God's said their name on more than one occasion, which I thought was very interesting. And he said Samuel's name lots of times, like 4 or 5, if I'm remembering the story right. So those were some random tidbits that I found on Saul's life that I thought were interesting, or Samuel's life that I thought were interesting, because sometimes we hear like one part of a Bible story and we're like, oh, okay, I know everything about that now, or that's a cool story, or like I talked about in the sermon. Most of the time when people preach that sermon about Samuel, they stop at the part where it says, "Speak, Lord, I am listening," because it's like, there's the call, answer it. And it's like, well, yeah, you can answer it, but then what, you got to also do it. It's not enough just to talk, you got to do. So I think that Samuel was a pretty impressive guy, and not saying that he was perfect, right? Nobody was perfect in the Bible. You look at any Bible hero and they all have messed up, some in a large way, like David. You got David, a man after God's own heart, and then commits adultery, murder, well, adultery slash sexual assault, murder, and then tries to cover it. It was wild. So you look at these people and you're like, everybody makes it. Well, we were talking about Samson right before this. One of the judges, one of the leaders of Israel, and he did some crazy stuff. He lost a bet because it was his new wife gave the answer to the riddle to these people, and Samson got mad and just went and killed like 13 other people and gave them their bloody clothes, because that was like the thing. He goes, you give me 13 outfits or I'll give you each an outfit. So when they cheated and got because the riddle was something like, what's in my pocket? Basically, it was one of those things, because wild. But Samson was definitely a unique character. And so you find these things that you look at in the Bible, and it's like these heroes, sometimes they get built up and you see when they mess up and it's like, oh, well, they still did amazing things for God. And so I think that's important for the kids to hear about too. And most of the time, that's kind of the direction we go with our stories. We look at kind of what they did wrong and how they were redeemed, and to help them, encourage them. Because growing up in the back, they get these Bible stories to get them interested. You hear about David, killing Goliath and doing really awesome, cool things. And then you hear about Moses, parting the Red Sea and doing really cool things. And then you don't see the part where, and honestly, I think Moses got the raw end of the deal. Like, they were just nagging him the whole time, saying, I wish we were still slaves. We should still be in Egypt. We're thirsty. We're hungry. And it's like God is literally providing for us, and they were doing it nonstop. So he got frustrated with him and hit a rock, and it was like, well, I would probably have hit them and not the rock. Like, I'd have been frustrated a long time ago, but still, you had the frustration and the anger issue, and it was less that and kind of the words he said when he did it, when you really look at that, because it wasn't It wasn't just I'm mad and I'm hitting the rock. It was like, you guys want water? Fine, I'll give you water. And he hit the is kind of the synopsis. If you boil that down, he hit the rock and water came out. So he kind of got punished for that. But you look at these Bible heroes and you're like, there's a human side to all of these people, and it's okay that you mess up. The important part is what you actually end up doing for God, right? Like how you can connect to God and what you can kind of improve and move on from there. Like speaking of David, I know I've talked to him a bunch. He tried to do that census where he said, I wonder how many people are in my kingdom. And God got mad at him and was like, no, this is not your kingdom, this is my kingdom. And so it brought a plague and killed a bunch of people. And so David had to, apologize and went and repented and all this stuff. And so God moved on, and David did some more really awesome stuff for God. And then he did the whole thing with the adultery and the murder, and then God had to punish him, and then he repented, and God helped him move to the end of his life. And so it was like David had this weird thing going up and down. You look at Peter, who was so impulsive for God that it was wild. Like, I think Jonathan says all the time how he relates to Peter perfectly, because Peter chopped a guy's ear off because they were taking Jesus. He got angry and said, no, and chopped an ear off. And God was like, hey, or Jesus said, hey, we don't do that here. Like, we if you live by the sword, you die by the sword, and like healed his ear back. And then hopped off a boat in the middle of a storm and went walking, and didn't even realize he was doing it till he got to Jesus, which is, I think, crazy. Like, I feel like I would have noticed it as soon as like I put my hands on the edge of the boat. I'd have been like, nah, that's dumb. That's not smart. I'm not jumping in. And also it's like, man, you got from the boat all the way to Jesus walking on the waves. How do you not know? Like, what would that have been like too? Like, would it have been like walking up a grass hill, like walking up a wave and down a wave? Or would it just been like, was he walking like on, anyway, it's random Joey thoughts of the evening. But that's what I'm saying. Like, was there like a still path to Jesus, or was he having to walk over? Because if he was walking over the waves, there's no shot he didn't. Like, I don't understand. So that meant his faith was so strong that he was walking over and stepping down off the wave and being like, this is normal. And then he got all the way to Jesus before he was like, this isn't normal. So it's like, man, I feel like as soon as you got to Jesus, that should have been we're good now, and everything. But he did, and that's when he was like, this is not normal. It's like, that should have been the moment you were for sure fine. But whatever. And then but what broke him was somebody just saying, hey, do you know that guy, when he was being, judged and persecuted? And he was like, nah, I don't know him. And he did it 3 times, and just to try to save his own hide. And I feel like he was just not really, really, truly thinking about what was happening, And Jesus has warned him before. He said, you're going to deny me 3 times. And he was like, there's no way I'm going to do that. He was like, I love you too much. There's no shot I'm going to deny you. And then not even really thinking about it, because this angry mob's around. Sam's upset. You guys hear that? This angry mob's around, and he just denies it. He's like, no, I don't know him. That's not me. And they were like, no, that was you walking with that guy. And he goes, nah, that was somebody else, right? Like, I feel like that's a really common thing to do. And then as soon as that rooster crowed, Peter was like, oh, like God told me I was going to do this, right? And we talked that story ends really cool, because Jesus doesn't let him just go on carrying that, right? Just like these other Bible heroes. Jesus kind of fixes him and does this cool thing where he makes sure before he leaves, he heals him, because he does the whole thing. It's like, do you love me? And when Peter goes, of course, Lord, I do. Then feed my sheep, watch the flock, take care. And he did that 3 times, and it was to make up for the fact that Peter had denied him 3 times. And then Jesus kind of did like then we're fine, like, don't carry that weight, that guilt. It's okay, and I feel like sometimes we forget that Jesus never just healed on base levels, right? Like when he healed beggars and people with leprosy, and like, he didn't just say, hey, you're healed, and then walked away. Like, he always spent time with people. He went into the leper colonies, like into those buildings. He didn't just, he could have just walked past and everybody in there would have been healed, right? He had that level of power, but it was something different. It was on a different level. My favorite go-to sermon is talking about the woman who bleeds and like that she couldn't figure it out, used all her money, spending money on doctors trying to figure out what was happening to her, and she was like, oh, if I just touch that guy's cloak, I bet it could heal me, right? And so she does it, and then Jesus says, well, this is crazy because he was like, wait, who touched me? And I just think it was fun. Like, I'm just imagining myself there because we all know that there weren't cars on those roads back in the day, right? So the roads were a lot skinnier. It was a decent sized town. And it was really packed, right? Because it says like she had to jostle and people were everywhere. And when Jesus says, "Who touched me?" his disciples goes, where there's people everywhere. What do you mean, who touched you, right? And so I could just imagine Jesus stopping and saying, "Someone touched me," and his disciples are around him. They're like, "Yeah, like 8,000 people. I touched you like a bunch of times. Like there's everyone is touching you." But Jesus knew what had happened, and it's not like he was like, "I felt power go out of me, and I don't know what it was." He knew exactly what was happening, right? He knew exactly who he healed. That wasn't for him, right? That wasn't to satisfy his curiosity. He knew exactly who it was. It was so she could be 100% truly healed, right? Because what happens next is she comes forward and falls at his feet and says, "It was me. I knew if I had just touched your cloak that I would be healed." And the first thing he says to her is, "Daughter, your faith has healed you." And I love that because in those times, right, you get this weird disease that you can't cure, you're ostracized, you're cut off, right? You're separated, you don't have family, you don't have friends because they don't want it, because they don't know what it is and they don't want it, so they're like, you go away, right? And it said she'd had it for years trying to fix it. And so imagine the loneliness of that, the loss of all those close people to you. And then Jesus, the first word out of his mouth is he calls her daughter. He brings her into his family, right? Incorporates her into him and then says, "Your faith has healed you." It's not like, "Oh, it's because of me that you're healed," right? Even though it was. But he's saying, you and your actions and your faith is what has healed you. So I love those stories because it happens all over the place. I think just before that or after that, before that is when the legionnaire comes and says, "My daughter is sick," and Jesus says, "Okay, well, take me to her." And he goes, "No, no, no." He goes, You're busy. I know all you have to do is say she'll be better, and she'll be better." And Jesus said, "Your faith has healed her. She's fine." So he goes back and she's fine. And it's so many times Jesus has been like, if we just step up and act, if we just have a little bit of faith, we have a little bit of hope, it'll heal us. But it's not enough just to do that. He has to heal us completely. And we talk to the kids, like I talk to the kids about this all the time. It's like Jesus isn't going to heal you just like physically, right? Like if he performs a miracle, you're not just going to be healed physically. He's going to make sure you're healed spiritually and emotionally as well, just like with that woman. Like so many times, Jesus never just was like, zap, and then would walk away. It wasn't like some magic power that he was using. He was truly connecting with these people like only our Savior and Lord can. And it's really cool. And you look at the people in the past like Samuel and like Samson and like these people that you look at and you're like, man, those people can be a little weird sometimes, and I don't truly understand how they could be like champions of God. But God can use anybody, and it doesn't matter. You don't have to be perfect, right? Because nobody's going to be perfect. And if we just step up and try a little bit, then God can kind of take the rest, right? Our faith, if we just have a little bit of faith and take that step, right? Talked about the prodigal son. That was my last sermon that we did, but mentioned it a little bit today. If you just take that one step, if you just turn towards God and take that step towards him, you're going to see him running towards you down the road, right? Like he's coming. Like he's not going to let you loose. He's there for you. And that's so incredible to think about. Like a lot of times we see our God as this big, mysterious creator. But how many times does Jesus tell us that he's a loving God, a loving Father, right? And so he is that mysterious creator, because there are things like we just read about in Samuel where we're like, whoa, I don't know what the heck that was, right? Like a witch brought someone back from like legit a ghost, and he had a prophecy while he was a ghost. Like that's wild, and we don't truly understand it. We can't really understand how it worked or how it happened. But then we also have this loving Father that we can kind of relate to our lives, and we can see, oh, I can kind of understand how that could happen, right? Like like someone's love for their child or for someone in their life. I can see how they would do anything for that person. And that's why God related it to a prodigal son. That's like he said, our father's love is like this father's love. And it seems a little wild, a little extreme, but they can understand it, right? And there's I don't know, there's so many worship songs. I love music. I love connecting to God through music, and there's so many songs like oh no. The name of the song fell out of my brain. I was talking to Erica this afternoon, and I was trying to say some like famous person's name, and two famous people in a row, two celebrities, and I was like, that person, and it was just gone. And I think preaching, I was like I used all of my brain power to just I don't know, it was wild. So I knew that was going to happen. Trying to think of another word under that song title, and it's gone. I have no clue. Couldn't tell you, and I love that song. But anyways, sorry, tangents. Uh, I know I went off on a big tangent there about all of that, but I feel like that was kind of where I was supposed to go. Does anybody have any questions or yes?
I think going back to Samuel and Saul in chapter 15, 1 Samuel chapter 15, 22 through 23, they were fighting the Amalekites, and God had told them to not bring anything back, destroy everything, leave it, or whatever. But Saul let them bring some stuff back. So Samuel said that has the Lord as much delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of divination, and insubordination is as iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected you from being king. I think the same thing is, if we reject him enough, then he's going to reject us. It's not us, or not God, that leaves us. We leave him. He keeps wanting you to come back to him, but if you reject long enough, he's going to finally say, okay. So don't reject him. Like he said earlier, if you hear the call, answer. Sorry.
You're fine. Um, Talk to in the similar vein of Eli's house, right? Like Eli and his sons, where they had blasphemed against God, and God had kind of told Eli, "Hey, you got to get them in line. You got to figure it out." And Eli didn't really do anything or do enough, maybe. And so his sons kept abusing the system and kept doing things they shouldn't do and kept blaspheming against God. So God told Samuel, he was like, "All right, tell Eli, I'm done with him." Right? Like, and it said that they can never atone for this, right? Because it's blasphemy, we hear later, is the only unforgivable sin. And it's blasphemy, and the kids ask that all the time too. And blasphemy is if you think about it, it's kind of hard to do because it's got to be on purpose and repetitive. It's got to be a pattern, right? You got to you got to mean to do it, know you're doing it, don't regret doing it. Like it's not like a maybe that, no, it's like a for sure. And then it's blasphemy against the Holy Spirit, right? So it's not just enough to do it against God, because it says his sons blasphemed against God and God gave him a second chance, right? Kind of told Eli, hey, they got to figure it out. But in the New Testament, God goes so far as to say the only unforgivable sin is blasphemy against the Holy Spirit, right? So it's saying, I've left this piece of me to help you. I've left it behind. If you turn against it, if you say it's not real, if you blaspheme against it, then you're cut off. I'm done with you. So there are some things that we can do that God's just like, I've tried my best, but I can't do anything. And that is interesting all in its own, because
That's all on us.
yeah, because we have free will. That's what I was going to say. That's an interesting, because that can come up with free will predestination, because I think, anyway. That's another. That's not another one of those things where I kind of leave up, but it's always fun to have those debates. But I'm 100% on the free will side because it literally says so many times in the Bible that we have free will. And what would be the point of God creating us to love Him if He literally says this person yes, this person no, this person loves me, this person doesn't? Like that's not what love is, right? So love is saying I'm gonna give you the choice to love me back, right? And if you do, then that's amazing because you can never force someone or make someone to love something or you, right? So it's always like I'm going to put all the pieces in play, and then it's up to you guys, and we have to choose. So I've always been on that side of that fence. I know there's scriptures that kind of back up both things, but I'm 100% free will because there's just basically on the love thing. Like it's like God, there's no way a loving God would create someone and purposely sin them, like give them no shot. Like they have to have a choice and a chance to choose heaven and God. Like that's just what a loving God would do. So, well, it's 7 o'clock. I don't want to ramble on too much longer. But I'm always around if you have questions or want other random stories about Bible characters that are weird. I'm always here.
You touched on it there, the predestination. I feel the predestination is God knows everything. He knows what's going to happen. He knows if we're going to choose Him or not, but we don't. So that's our free will to choose Him. He knows what we're going to choose, but we don't. So He's given us that free will to choose Him, you know. But predestination, He knows what it is, you know. He knows everything, and He knows what you're going to do and what you're going to say.
All right. Well, let's pray, and then we'll be dismissed. Dear God, thank you for allowing us to be here tonight to talk more with you about Samuel and missions, God, and just how you work through us, how Jesus worked when He was here on earth, God, kind of His methodology, what He did. God, we thank you so much for loving us, for giving us that choice to where we can just choose you, God. Help us to not go so far down the path like Eli's sons, where we're just so stubborn. God, I know that is probably one of the things I struggle with the most is stubbornness, and I know that's kind of a human trait where we just think we know what's best. And God, we know that ultimately here that you are the best. You know what is best, God, and all we have to do is pray that we can find your path, your will. Pray that you can speak to us, that you can use us, that you can call us, and we have the courage to stand up and kind of answer that call, God, that we can then move on it and act on it. God, help us as we go throughout this week. Give us opportunities to answer that call. Give us opportunities to act on it, God. Put those opportunities in our path and give us the courage and the strength to act on them. We just love you and we thank you so much for all that you do for us every single day. And in Jesus' name, amen. All right. Bye, Dave.